My name is Daniel Harper, and I'm 35 years old. What happened when the lawyer finished reading my grandfather's will last Tuesday is something that will forever change how my extended family sees success, loyalty, and which family member truly understood the values that mattered most to our patriarch. Picture this: my cousins sitting in the mahogany-paneled law office, their confident smirks fading to horror as the attorney announced that the grandfather they'd assumed would reward their conventional achievements had instead left his intact $2.30 million estate to the family member they'd spent years mocking as the black sheep who never amounted to anything. You see, that moment when the lawyer read my name as the sole beneficiary wasn't just about money. It was about vindication from beyond the grave by the one person who had truly seen and valued the path I'd chosen while everyone else dismissed it as failure. The same cousins who had spent the previous weekend at our family reunion, laughing about my unconventional lifestyle and lack of real accomplishments, were now staring at legal documents that proved our grandfather had been watching, evaluating, and ultimately choosing to reward character over conformity. Before we dive into the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about family judgment backfiring in the most spectacular ways possible. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I love connecting with people who understand that sometimes the people who see your true worth aren't the ones making the loudest judgments about your choices. Let me take you back to that painful family reunion just 6 days before Grandpa Edward's unexpected passing, when I walked into the Harper family's annual gathering, knowing I'd face the usual barrage of criticism about my life choices, hoping that maybe this year would be different. The reunion was held at my Uncle Richard's sprawling suburban home, the kind of property that screamed financial success and traditional achievement. Richard worked in commercial real estate, owned multiple properties, and had built the kind of life that impressed other family members and validated their beliefs about what success should look like. As I pulled up in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since college, I could see the lineup of newer vehicles in the driveway. My cousin Marcus's BMW, cousin Sarah's Mercedes SUV, cousin Jennifer's Audi sedan. Every car represented the kind of financial achievement that my family understood and celebrated. I'd barely made it through the front door when the familiar pattern of family interaction began. "Daniel, there you are," Aunt Patricia said with that mixture of affection and pity I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "We were wondering if you'd make it this year." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, knowing that my attendance was viewed more as an obligation than a contribution to family happiness. The living room was filled with the usual suspects: aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had built traditionally successful lives in corporate America, real estate, finance, and medicine. Everyone had impressive job titles, substantial salaries, and the kind of lifestyle markers that made for easy conversation at family gatherings. And then there was me, the 35-year-old who had spent the last 8 years working as a social worker in inner-city schools, making $47,000 annually while living in a modest apartment and driving a car that was older than some of my colleagues. "Yes? So Daniel," Marcus said as I joined the group gathered around the appetizer table, "still saving the world one troubled kid at a time?" The question was delivered with a smirk that made it clear he viewed my career choice as naive idealism rather than meaningful work. "Still working in the school system," I replied neutrally, having learned that defending my career choice usually led to condescending lectures about financial responsibility and practical life decisions. "And how's that working out financially?" Sarah chimed in with false concern. "I mean, can you actually live on what they pay social workers these days? Because from what I can see, you're still driving the same car you had in college and living in that tiny apartment across town." The circle of cousins was forming around me, each one contributing to what had become a family tradition: the annual assessment of Daniel's continued failure to achieve conventional success. "It's just that we worry about you," Marcus said with patronizing sincerity. "You're 35 years old, Daniel. At some point, you need to think about building real financial security, maybe finding a career that actually pays enough to support a family." "I'm not planning to have a family." "Because you can't afford one," Sarah said bluntly. "Which is exactly our point. The point is that Daniel has chosen to prioritize helping other people over helping himself," Uncle Richard said, joining the conversation with his typical air of authority. "And while that's admirable in theory, it's not practical for building a stable adult life. Some of us have responsibilities," Jennifer added, gesturing toward her husband and 2 children across the room. Mortgages, college funds, retirement planning? You can't do any of that on a social worker's salary. The conversation was following its predictable path, my family expressing concern about my financial situation, while simultaneously making it clear that they viewed my career choice as evidence of poor judgment and lack of ambition. But what stung most was hearing these criticisms in front of Grandpa Edward, who was sitting quietly in his favorite armchair, listening to his grandchildren discuss their lives and achievements. At 89, he was still sharp and observant, but he rarely participated in these family discussions anymore, preferring to watch and listen, rather than engage in conversations that often felt more like competitions than connections. The problem with Daniel, Marcus continued, clearly enjoying his role as family truth-teller, is that he's never understood the importance of building something substantial. He's content to live like a college student forever, working a job that makes him feel good about himself but doesn't actually accomplish anything meaningful in the real world. Hey now, Aunt Patricia protested weakly. Daniel helps child. Randall. That's meaningful work. Is it though? Richard asked rhetorically. I mean, what has he actually accomplished? Has he reduced dropout rates? Improved test scores? Generated any measurable impact that justifies choosing such a low-paying career? The question hung in the air like a challenge. They wanted metrics, data, proof that my work had value according to standards they understood and respected. Daniel's always been the black sheep of the family, Sarah said with a laugh that carried more truth than humor. The one who marches to his own drum and doesn't worry about what anyone else thinks. The black sheep who never amounted to anything, Jennifer added, clearly thinking she was being clever, rather than cruel. The laughter that followed was uncomfortable but telling. My cousins found my life choices amusing rather than respectable, viewing my career as evidence of my inability to succeed in the real world, rather than a deliberate choice to prioritize service over salary. But what they didn't notice, what they were too busy judging to observe, was Grandpa Edward's reaction to their assessment of my life and character. His face had tightened with disapproval, and his hands were gripping the arms of his chair in a way that suggested he was struggling to contain his response to what he was hearing. But he remained silent, letting his grandchildren reveal their true values through their treatment of the family member they'd labeled as unsuccessful. At least he's consistent, Marcus concluded. Consistently disappointing, but consistent. The room erupted in laughter again, with even some of the adults joining in what had become a roast of my life choices. I sat there taking it, as I had for years, because arguing would only provide more entertainment and wouldn't change anyone's mind about the value of my work. But I noticed that Grandpa Edward wasn't laughing. He was watching his grandchildren mock one of their own, and his expression suggested he was learning something about his family that he didn't like. If you've ever been the family member whose unconventional choices made you a target for relatives who measure worth by salary and status symbols, type different path in the comments. What comes next will show you that sometimes the people who matter most are watching and evaluating very different qualities than the ones being discussed at family parties. The reunion continued with its usual pattern of competitive achievement sharing. Marcus talked about his latest real estate deals. Zara described her promotion to senior marketing director. Jennifer shared updates about her husband's medical practice expansion. Each success story was met with appropriate admiration and follow-up questions that demonstrated family interest and investment in their conventional achievements. When conversation briefly turned to my work, the questions were perfunctory and quickly redirected to more interesting topics. Nobody asked about the kids I'd helped graduate who had been heading toward dropping out. Nobody wanted to hear about the families I'd connected with mental health services or food assistance programs. Nobody showed curiosity about the crisis interventions that had prevented tragedies, or the advocacy work that had improved conditions for vulnerable children. My work was viewed as a nice hobby that happened to pay a small salary, rather than a professional calling that required skill, dedication, and produced meaningful results in people's lives. But throughout the evening I noticed Grandpa Edward watching these interactions with increasing attention. When Marcus bragged about evicting tenants from one of his rental properties to renovate for higher-paying residents, Grandpa's jaw tightened. When Sarah complained about having to work with difficult clients who couldn't afford her company's premium services, he frowned. When Jennifer dismissed her children's teacher as just not very bright, because the woman had suggested their son might need additional support, his disapproval was visible. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down, Grandpa Edward approached me in the kitchen where I was helping clean up. "Daniel," he said quietly, "walk with me outside for a few minutes." We went out to his favorite spot in the backyard, where he'd always done his serious thinking and important conversations. The evening air was cool, and the noise from the family gathering felt distant and less overwhelming. "I want you to know," he began, "that I've been watching how this family treats you, and I don't like what I see. Grandpa, they're just concerned about my financial security. They mean well, do they? Do they?" Because what I heard tonight wasn't concern, it was mockery. They were entertaining themselves by belittling your choices and your character. They don't understand why I chose this career path. They don't understand because they don't ask the right questions. They want to know how much money you make, but they never ask how many lives you've changed. They worry about your retirement planning, but they don't celebrate the children you've helped succeed. I was surprised by his insight into my work and his recognition of its value. For years I'd assumed that Grandpa Edward, like the rest of the family, viewed my career as evidence of my inability to achieve conventional success. "You know about my work, Daniel? I know about everything my grandchildren do. The difference is that I pay attention to what matters, not just what's impressive at cocktail parties." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Marcus makes money by displacing poor families to serve wealthy tenants. Sarah builds her career by excluding clients who can't afford premium services. Jennifer's success depends on maintaining barriers that keep struggling families from accessing help they need. And me? You spend your days trying to level the playing field for kids who start life with every disadvantage. You work for families who need advocates, not customers. You measure success by how many children graduate, get into college, avoid dangerous situations, and build better lives than their circumstances suggested were possible." The validation from someone whose opinion I'd always valued was overwhelming. For years I'd wondered if my family was right about my choices being naive or impractical. But Grandpa Edward saw my work as I saw it, as a calling that required courage, skill, and produced results that mattered more than profit margins. "Grandpa, I appreciate you understanding what I'm trying to accomplish. Daniel, I don't just understand it, I admire it. You chose the harder path because it was the right path. Your cousins chose easier paths because they lead to personal comfort and social approval. They've built successful lives. They've built comfortable lives. There's a difference between success and comfort, between achievement and accumulation." We talked for another 20 minutes about my work, the challenges facing the kids I served, and the systemic issues that made advocacy necessary. It was the most meaningful conversation I'd had with a family member in years. "Promise me something," he said as we prepared to go back inside. "What?" "Promise me you won't let them convince you that your path isn't valuable. What you're doing matters more than anything any of them have accomplished, even if they're too blind to see it." "I promise, Grandpa." "Good. And Daniel, yes? Don't change who you are to please people who wouldn't recognize real success if it was standing right in front of them." That was the last meaningful conversation I ever had with Grandpa Edward. 6 days later he suffered a massive heart attack and died peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was a celebration of his 89 years of life, his service in World War II, his successful hardware store business, and his role as patriarch of a family that had produced doctors, lawyers, business owners, and other conventionally successful professionals. I delivered one of the eulogies, talking about his wisdom, his integrity, and his ability to see value in people and choices that others might overlook. But I don't think anyone understood that I was talking about how he'd seen me. 2 weeks after the funeral, the family gathered again, this time in Lawyer Harrison's office for the reading of Grandpa Edward's will. Everyone expected a straightforward distribution of assets among his 4 children, with smaller bequests for grandchildren, and perhaps some charitable donations to veterans. Marcus, Sarah, and Jennifer sat confidently, discussing their plans for their inherited portions and making jokes about whether the black sheep would finally have enough money to buy a decent car. Then Lawyer Harrison began reading the will, and everything changed. "To my beloved grandchildren, I leave the following. To Marcus Harper, my pocket watch, with hopes that he will learn to value time spent helping others as much as time spent accumulating wealth." Marcus looked puzzled but pleased to receive a family heirloom. To Sarah Harper Williams, my collection of books on ethics and philosophy, with the hope that she will discover principles more valuable than profit margins. Sarah accepted this gift with polite confusion, clearly not understanding its significance. To Jennifer Harper Thompson, my wartime medals, with the hope that she will learn what real courage looks like, the courage to serve others rather than oneself. Jennifer seemed pleased to receive something with obvious sentimental value. And to Daniel Harper, the lawyer continued, who has already learned the lessons I hope to teach all my grandchildren about service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of success, I leave the remainder of my estate, all financial assets, REAs, estate holdings and business investments, totaling approximately 2 times 30 cents million dollars. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus, Sarah, and Jennifer stared at the lawyer, as if he had spoken in a foreign language, their faces cycling through confusion, shock, and dawning horror. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally. "There must be some mistake." "Did you say Daniel inherits everything?" "That's correct, Mr. Harper was very specific about this decision, and included a letter explaining his reasoning. Lawyer Harrison opened a sealed envelope and began reading Grandpa Edward's final words to his family. "To my children and grandchildren, I have spent my final years watching you build your lives and careers, and I have learned much about your values through your choices and your treatment of each other. Most of you have achieved conventional success, good salaries, nice homes, social status that impresses your neighbors and colleagues. But success without service is merely selfishness, and achievement without compassion is empty accomplishment. Daniel alone among my grandchildren chose to dedicate his life to helping others, particularly children, who face challenges that most people cannot imagine. While you mocked him for his modest lifestyle and low salary, he was building something far more valuable than any of your portfolios or properties. He was building a legacy of service that changes lives every single day. You called him the black sheep because he didn't conform to your definition of success. But I call him the shepherd because he spends his life protecting and guiding the most vulnerable members of our society. The money I leave to Daniel isn't a reward for his poverty, it's recognition for his wealth of character. It's acknowledgement that he understood what I tried to teach all of you, that we are measured not by what we accumulate for ourselves, but by what we contribute to others. I hope this decision will cause you to reflect on your own choices, and perhaps reconsider what truly matters in life. And I hope Daniel will use these resources to expand his ability to help the children and families who need advocates like him." The letter continued with personal messages to each grandchild, but the main point was clear. Grandpa Edward had been evaluating his family's values for years, and Daniel was the only one who had lived up to his standards. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. Marcus accused me of manipulating a senile old man. Sarah threatened to contest the will on grounds that Grandpa couldn't have been mentally competent when he wrote it. Jennifer suggested that I had somehow tricked him into changing his estate planning. But lawyer Harrison had anticipated these challenges. He produced medical records showing that Grandpa Edward had been mentally sharp until the day he died, as well as video testimony he'd recorded 6 months earlier, explaining his decision and his reasoning. "Your grandfather was very clear about his intentions," the lawyer told my bitter cousins. "He spent considerable time thinking about this decision and wanted to ensure that his values were reflected in how his estate was distributed. The family relationships were permanently damaged, as you might expect when $2.30 million reveal the true character of people you thought you knew. Some family members took sides, others tried to mediate, and a few simply withdrew from the drama entirely. But the most important outcome wasn't the money, it was the validation. Grandpa Edward's final act had been to publicly declare that the family's black sheep was actually its most valuable member, that conventional success meant nothing without character. I used the inheritance exactly as Grandpa Edward had hoped. I established a foundation that provides emergency assistance to families in crisis, expanded tutoring and mentoring programs for at-risk students, and created scholarship funds for young people who wanted to pursue careers in social service. The foundation now serves over 500 families annually, and has helped more than 12,000 students graduate from high school and pursue higher education or job training. It's the kind of impact that can't be measured in profit margins or property values, but it represents the multiplication of everything I'd been trying to accomplish for years. 5 years later, when the foundation was featured in the newspaper for its community impact, I received a letter from Marcus. "Daniel," he wrote, "I've been thinking about what Grandpa Edward said in his will, about success and service and what really matters. I was wrong to mock your choices, and I'm sorry for the years I spent dismissing work that was more important than anything I was doing. I hope you can forgive me for being too blind to see what Grandpa saw in you from the beginning." Similar letters came from Sarah and Jennifer over the following months. The inheritance had forced them to confront their own values and consider whether their definitions of success were too narrow, too selfish, and ultimately too empty to satisfy someone who was genuinely wise. The black sheep they'd mocked for never amounting to anything had inherited not just money, but the explicit recognition from the family patriarch that his path was the most admirable, his choices were the most courageous, and his impact was the most meaningful. Sometimes the people who see your true worth aren't the ones whose opinions you hear most often. Sometimes they're quietly watching, evaluating character while others focus on careers, measuring service while others count salaries, recognizing real success while others celebrate conventional achievements. Grandpa Edward's will didn't just distribute money, it distributed judgment, and that judgment declared that the grandson who chose helping others over helping himself was the one who truly understood what it means to live a successful life. What unconventional path have you chosen that others don't understand? What service have you prioritized over salary? Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been the family black sheep whose values didn't match their definition of success, you're not alone. Comment service over status if you believe true success is measured by impact rather than income. Share this story with someone who needs to know that being different from your family doesn't mean being lesser than them. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories about family judgment, unexpected vindication, and the moment when conventional definitions of success are revealed to be tragically narrow. I'd love to know, should families support unconventional career choices even when they don't lead to high salaries, or is it natural to worry about relatives who prioritize service over financial security? Let me know in the comments. Remember, your worth isn't determined by their understanding of success, but when someone who truly matters recognizes your value, it validates everything you've been building despite their disapproval.